breaking news in Washington this morning as the White House grapples with more Epstein fallout. Next hour, President Trump could offer his first on-camera remarks since the Wall Street Journal reported that he wrote that bawdy birthday letter for Jeffrey Epstein in 2003. Of course, he's denying it, and new this morning, in the face of mounting pressure for more transparency on the infamous Epstein case, the Justice Department has reached out to Ghislaine Maxwell, the late sex offender's convicted co-conspirator. But at the same time, Trump is opposed to a House vote that would demand the release of even more Epstein files. And despite some GOP support for the measure, Speaker Mike Johnson is aligned with Trump and seeking to delay any vote until at least September. Let's bring in NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba, NBC senior national political reporter Sahil Kapoor on Capitol Hill for us. Also with us, New York Times reporter Matthew Goldstein and MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin. Monica, let's start with you. Some of Trump's top Justice Department officials now say they want federal prosecutors to speak to convicted Epstein co-conspirator Ghislaine Maxwell. So what is behind this move?
Yeah, and there are a lot of questions here, Ariel, about why now, why this meeting, and what, if any, information a meeting like this could produce. And it's really unclear because let's remind everybody that Ghislaine Maxwell was indicted and investigated under the first Trump administration, and she was convicted in the Biden administration. But if there were questions about any additional material or things that she could provide, a lot of that you would think would have taken place during the course of her trial. And if there was going to be any kind of a plea agreement, which there wasn't at the time, again, what kind of a question now would be different? That's what a lot of experts and what our own team, in terms of the reporting that we've done in the past, is raising here. But it comes at a moment where the administration and the president himself is under a lot of pressure to produce some new information, because there have still been many calls from his own supporters, from those leading the MAGA movement, to uncover, in their words, the truth of what happened here, even though we don't know what that means. So you do have the Deputy Attorney General saying that he was directed by the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, to schedule this meeting, and we're getting confirmation from Ghislaine Maxwell's own attorney. And you see there that comment from Todd Blanche. He writes, "No one is above the law and no lead is off limits." But again, it's really unclear what kind of a lead there could be here. And then for her own part, her lawyer is confirming and thanking President Trump for trying to pursue this, trying to see if there is anything new here, if there's any light that could be shed. Though again, she has been convicted. She was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison, which she is serving now. The question is there anything that she could provide, or is this meant as a distraction at a time when the administration has been raising other issues to try to detract from the conversation, though this new meeting only adds a lot more interest in the Epstein case.
So you saw there the lawyer confirming that this could potentially happen. She's been serving her 20-year prison sentence. So could Ghislaine Maxwell end up with a deal on this?
I think it's possible, Ariel. And the reason is where we are in Ghislaine Maxwell's own timeline. Ghislaine Maxwell is currently petitioning the Supreme Court to review her conviction. That's conviction, as Monica mentioned, that resulted in a 20-year prison sentence that was upheld by the Second Circuit. That's the Federal Appeals Court. And now, just as recently as last week, Trump's own Department of Justice saying Ghislaine Maxwell deserves to still be in prison, that she was not essentially a third-party beneficiary of the deal that Jeffrey Epstein struck many, many years ago with Florida prosecutors. That's a deal that was interpreted as to only cover Florida. That resulted in his prosecution by the Southern District of New York before his death, and also in Ghislaine Maxwell's prosecution.
It's so fascinating here. Matthew, you've reported on the Epstein paper trail and Trump's past friendship with him. So where does Ghislaine Maxwell fit into the puzzle here?
Well, I mean, she was basically Epstein's main confidant for many years, up until about 2009 or so. And one of her roles was to help recruit women and underage girls for Epstein. So she was very critical in, the operation, and she was around all the time at the various different properties. And obviously there are pictures of her and she knowing the president. But, one thing that's important to note is that she has maintained she's been innocent all along. She's been deposed and she's always indicated that she knew nothing about what was going on. And it would be a big break and turn for her to presumably cough up names. And even if she was to do that, the question is, would she have anything to back that up? I mean, just throwing out names is not usually what you need to do in terms of a plea deal. You need to offer up something to substantiate it, and it's not clear she would have any of that.
It would be fascinating to hear from her the first time since some of those civil suits against her. Sahil, GOP Congressman Thomas Massie wants to force a vote on releasing the Epstein files, but House Speaker Mike Johnson opposes that. He wants to push it off until at least after the August recess. Where do things stand, and what's the earliest we could see any potential movement on this?
Well, things are a bit of a mess here, Ariel. The House is largely frozen. The Rules Committee, which sends bills to the floor, had to cancel business yesterday because they can't find the votes to move forward with any of the business that Republican leaders want. The simple reason is that Democrats plan to offer amendments requiring the disclosure and release of files related to Jeffrey Epstein. A bunch of Republicans want to vote with them, and House Republican leadership can't allow that because that would go against the wishes of President Trump. So all they can vote on right now are bills requiring a 2/3 majority, so-called suspension votes, things like renaming the post office. They don't have a lot of those to do. So there's already talk at this point of cutting short business in the House this week and just sending members home for an extra few days for the entire month of August and coming back in September and dealing with this. Is that going to make a difference? Well, take a listen to what Congressman Tom Massie, who authored the resolution to require the release of Epstein files, said about that.
So what will happen is over the August recess, I think momentum will build for transparency. I don't think this is going to go away. And I think when we return in September, we'll get phase 2 of the Epstein files, because we'll get, I believe, every Democrat and at least a dozen Republicans who want transparency and justice.
Now, that dozen Republicans is key because he's using a discharge petition to get around House Republican leadership and force a vote against the will of Speaker Johnson, against the will of President Trump. And at least some Republicans this morning say it's inevitable. These files are going to come out, but they would prefer that the Trump administration does it on their own.
So clearly some infighting there. Monica, the White House trying to walk a pretty fine line here, pursuing new avenues to get some of this information out on Epstein, but clearly stopping very far short of what some of President Trump's constituents may want, a full dump of all these files. How are these mixed messages playing out with the MAGA base?
Yeah, it has certainly been fascinating and really complex to watch because many in the MAGA base are calling for a non-existent client list, and they have been really clamoring for that since this started. And it was the own Department of Justice under the president now and Attorney General Pam Bondi who says that no client list exists, that instead when she was referring to that on a Fox News interview earlier in the year, that she was talking about the totality of those documents. Then you had President Trump say that he wanted to direct her to release any relevant grand jury testimony that could be related to this. But that, of course, has to go through a court process. It has to go through a bunch of legal hurdles, and it's unclear whether anything that could be declassified and shared would shed any new light on this. And we also know, Ariel, that a lot of this information is related to minors and to the victims, those who were, again, the victims of convicted sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein and his co-conspirator Ghislaine Maxwell. So there are, again, not many indications that there could be new information, but that doesn't mean that anything has certainly quelled the desire from his own supporters to see what else could be out there with this conspiracy.
So on that point, Lisa, what is the danger? Obviously, there's the potential to re-traumatize some of these victims who may be in that grand jury assessment.
Well, it's not just the re-traumatization of them, but there are laws on the books now that protect against the release of their information. And I'm not just talking about their names, I'm talking about any information that could be used to identify them. The last wave of unsealing of materials in a civil Epstein-related case resulted in a bunch of victims coming forward saying, I feel that I am in danger. If you release my name, it's not just a question of my mental health, my physical safety is at risk too. But I also want to say to some folks who have been critical of my saying that victims' rights are at issue here because I have said that the redactions aren't enough. Imagine that you gave testimony in a matter like this and they cover up every mention of the word Ariel Reshef and your address and maybe other things that people could use to identify you. When that is in the public domain, you know that that's about you. You hear every news channel, every publication talking about you, and the risks to victims' mental health here should not be undermined at all. It is real, it is serious. The fact that we aren't talking to victims, but talking to each other is a reflection of how much they want to stay under the radar and protected right now.
Here, the top Democrat on the Senate Finance Committee says Epstein sent over $1 billion in wire transfers, and that should have piqued some interest from banks at the time. Where was all that money going? Who was he paying out, and what was he paying for?
Yeah, I mean, that's basically, this kind of operation required a tremendous amount of money and inflow because you have properties all over the world where he was taking women and girls. The banks there was like JP Morgan, which was his bank for a long time. There was some awareness of what was going on, but the reality is that Epstein was bringing in a lot of business for these banks in terms of clients. He also was bringing in a lot of businesses himself in terms of the transactions, was generating a lot of fees. It's a sad statement to some degree that Wall Street sort of wanted to look the other way when they could, because he was a powerful person and valuable to them. It's a great mystery still what he was really doing in terms of the tax advice he provided people, but we do know that people like Leon Black, the private equity billionaire, paid him over $158 million for tax advice. The thing is, all the stuff may be purely innocent in the sense of what was going on, but it does raise a lot of mystery, and it shows like there needs to be better checks and balances in terms of Wall Street and monitoring its behavior and how its money goes around. And sex trafficking is supposed to be something they're supposed to be on the lookout for.
Yeah, that was a lot of money floating around. Matthew, were those transactions ever investigated as part of the various Epstein criminal probes? Some Republicans are now saying, why didn't some of the leadership then press President Biden's administration to release the information?
Yeah, it's not, the money transactions have never really come up. They certainly didn't come up in Maxwell's case and they weren't mentioned in the indictment against Epstein. If he had lived and if he had gone to trial, it's presumably possible some of these money transactions may have come up since it was his operation. You can have a separate idea, like why were the banks themselves not looked at? We've seen obviously money laundering cases brought against banks. The only bank that ever paid any penalty was Deutsche Bank, which was investigated by the New York Department of Financial Services. It's a good question, like were regulators, did they fall down on the job, and other federal authorities in looking at the money flows? I think that's a legitimate question to be asked.
Well, nothing is quieting this story anytime soon. Monica Alba, Sahil Kapoor, Matthew Goldstein, and Lisa Rubin, we thank you all.